In the autumn of 1865, investigators found 300 people had simply walked into the Pennsylvania wilderness and disappeared forever. Their footprints led deep into the forest before ending abruptly. Not scattered, not disturbed, just gone, as if the earth itself had swallowed their tracks whole. Please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Picture this. You're walking through what should be a bustling mining town, but your footsteps echo against buildings that seem to hold their breath. Lanterns still flicker in windows, casting shadows that dance across tables where meals sit half-finished, growing cold in the October air. Laundry hangs motionless on lines, stiff with morning frost that never had a chance to melt. Children's toys lie abandoned in doorways, and in the distance, the mine shaft yawns open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. This was the scene that greeted Pennsylvania state officials when they arrived at the hamlet of Blackheath on October 23, 1865. What they found would challenge everything they thought they knew about human nature, physics, and the very ground beneath their feet. Tonight, we're diving into one of American history's most thoroughly buried mysteries. A story that mining companies spent decades trying to erase, that mapmakers conspired to forget, and that locals still whisper about in voices that barely rise above a breath. Because sometimes the earth keeps secrets that were never meant to see daylight, and sometimes those secrets have teeth. Blackheath wasn't much to look at, even in its heyday. Nestled in a narrow valley roughly 40 miles northwest of Pittsburgh, it existed for one purpose: to feed coal from the belly of the earth into the hungry furnaces of America's industrial resurrection. The Civil War had ended just months before, and the nation was rebuilding itself on rivers of black gold flowing from places exactly like this. The town housed 287 souls, according to the Allegheny Mining Company's final roster, a number that company officials would later claim never existed at all. Most residents were Welsh and Irish immigrants who'd traded the poverty of their homelands for the promises of American prosperity. What they found instead was a life spent in tunnels that stretched like veins through the surrounding hills, following seams of coal that seemed to run deeper than anyone had expected. The hamlet itself was unremarkable. 2 rows of company housing built from local timber, a general store that doubled as the post office, a small Methodist church, and the mine superintendent's house overlooking it all like a watchful eye. At the center of town stood the mine head, a wooden tower housing the pulley system that lowered men into the earth each morning and, God willing, brought them back up each evening. But in September of 1865, something began to change in Blackheath, something that would turn this forgotten valley into a puzzle that investigators still haven't solved. The first signs were subtle. Vibrations felt through boot soles, a low humming that seemed to rise from the mine shafts after dark. Margaret O'Brien, the postmistress, wrote to her sister in Philadelphia, "The very ground seems restless here, Mary. At night, I can feel it stirring beneath my bed, like some great beast turning in its sleep." Thomas Henley, the mine supervisor, noted in his daily reports that coal production had increased dramatically without explanation. The seams were yielding more material than geological surveys had predicted, as if the earth itself was eager to give up its buried treasures. Workers spoke of tunnels that seemed to extend themselves overnight, passages they swore hadn't been there the day before. "It's like the mountain is opening itself to us," wrote miner Seamus MacDonnell in what would be his final letter home. "We hardly need to dig anymore. The coal almost falls into our carts." But the strangest reports came from the children. In any mining town, children learn early to read the rhythms of the earth. They know the sound of blasting powder, the rumble of ore carts, the whistle that calls their fathers home. But in September of 1865, the children of Blackheath began speaking of sounds that had no earthly explanation. 8-year-old Annie Price told her mother that the ground was singing. Not metaphorically, literally singing, in voices that seemed to come from deep beneath their small house. Her mother, Catherine, initially dismissed this as a child's imagination until she began hearing it herself. A low, harmonious humming that rose from the floorboards after midnight. The local schoolteacher, Miss Eleanor Hartwell, documented these reports with the methodical precision of someone who understood that children often see truths adults have learned to ignore. In her journal, discovered decades later in a Pittsburgh archive, she wrote, "The children speak unanimously of voices beneath the school. Not 1 or 2 fanciful students, but all 23 pupils describe the same phenomenon, a chorus of humming that grows stronger each day. Young Timothy Walsh claims he can make out words, though he cannot say what language they might be in." More disturbing were the reports from parents who found their children sleepwalking, not wandering aimlessly, but moving with apparent purpose toward the mine head. Night after night, mothers and fathers found themselves chasing pajama-clad figures through the darkness. Children who walked with their eyes open but seemed to see something invisible to adult perception. "It was like they were being called," wrote Catherine Price. "Not just my Annie, but half the children in town. They'd rise from their beds and walk straight toward those mine shafts as if they had appointments to keep." The town doctor, elderly Dr. Cornelius Webb, initially attributed the sleepwalking to the stress of post-war adjustment. Many families had lost fathers or brothers in the conflict, and children often manifested trauma in unusual ways. But when he examined the affected children, he found them to be in perfect physical health. Better health, in fact, than he'd ever recorded in a mining community. "Their lung function is remarkable," Dr. Webb noted in his medical journal. "These children, who should show signs of coal dust exposure, have the respiratory capacity of mountain dwellers. It's as if the air they're breathing is somehow purified." By early October, the sleepwalking had evolved into something more coordinated. Parents reported finding their children gathered at the mine head in small groups, standing silently in the pre-dawn darkness, facing the shaft entrance as if waiting for something to emerge, or for permission to descend. October brought changes that even the most skeptical residents could no longer ignore. The vibrations that had once been subtle tremors now shook buildings with enough force to rattle windows and tip water from glasses. But seismologists from the University of Pennsylvania, called in by increasingly worried company officials, could find no geological explanation. "The tremors follow no pattern consistent with natural seismic activity," reported Professor Edgar Whitman in his official assessment. "They occur at precise intervals, every 4 hours and 17 minutes, and they seem to originate not from tectonic plates, but from specific points deep within the mine system itself." More puzzling was the fact that instruments placed inside the mine shafts registered no seismic activity at all. The tremors existed only on the surface, as if something deep underground was sending signals upward while the earth itself remained perfectly still. Thomas Henley, the mine supervisor, began documenting changes in the underground environment that defied his 30 years of mining experience. Tunnels that had been mapped and surveyed were showing different dimensions from one day to the next. Support timbers installed by his crews were found arranged in patterns he swore his men had never created. "We'll go down in the morning and find passages have been widened overnight," Henley wrote to the Allegheny Mining Company headquarters. "Not collapsed, widened. The coal seams are exposing themselves, and the tunnels are becoming perfect circles, smooth as glass. My men are frightened to go below ground, and frankly, so am I." But it was the sound that truly unsettled the residents of Blackheath. The humming that Margaret O'Brien had first noticed was now audible throughout the town. It rose from storm drains, emanated from basements, and seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of their homes. At night, when the mining equipment fell silent, the entire valley thrummed with a frequency that residents felt in their bones. Dr. Webb documented the physical effects this sound was having on the population. Sleep patterns had normalized. The insomnia that plagued most mining communities had simply vanished. Respiratory ailments that were endemic among coal workers had cleared up completely. Even chronic injuries seemed to heal with unusual speed. Mrs. Kowalski's arthritis, which has troubled her for 15 years, has completely disappeared, Dr. Webb wrote. Mr. Patterson's black lung shows no symptoms. It's as if the very air in this valley has become medicinal. But perhaps the most unsettling change was in the people themselves. Visitors to Blackheath, merchants, postal workers, company inspectors, began reporting that conversations with residents felt strangely disconnected. People answered questions accurately, but seemed to be listening to something else simultaneously, as if the words were coming from very far away. They speak to you, but their attention is elsewhere, wrote Postal Inspector Harold Fleming in his route report. It's like trying to converse with someone who's listening to a symphony you cannot hear. In the week leading up to October 20th, 1865, residents of Blackheath sent what would be their final communications to the outside world. These letters, preserved in postal archives and family collections, paint a picture of a community undergoing a transformation that they themselves couldn't fully comprehend. Margaret O'Brien wrote to her sister, "The sound has become beautiful, Mary. I know that must seem impossible, but we've learned to listen properly now. It's not just humming, it's music, complex and wonderful beyond description. The children understand it better than we do. They sing along sometimes, in harmonies I've never heard before." Miner Patrick Sullivan sent what he intended as his final letter home to County Cork. "I won't be returning to Ireland as planned. There's work here that needs completing. Not the coal mining, but something more important. Something that's been waiting for us underground. We're so close now to understanding what it wants." But it was the letter from schoolteacher Eleanor Hartwell that would later chill investigators to the bone. Writing to her former colleagues at the Philadelphia Teachers College, she described changes in her students that went far beyond the sleepwalking incidents. The children's academic abilities have progressed at an impossible rate. Young ones who could barely read last month are now working through mathematical concepts I learned in university. They speak of geological formations with precision that exceeds my own education. Yesterday, 7-year-old Mary Hendricks drew a map of the mine tunnels that proved more accurate than the surveyor's official plans. They say they're learning from the voices below. They claim the earth itself is teaching them about minerals, about deep time, about processes that occur in the planet's core. I should be skeptical, but their knowledge is verifiable. They describe geological layers and mineral compositions with scientific accuracy I couldn't possibly have taught them. Most disturbing of all, they've begun to speak of the invitation. They say the earth has been preparing a place for us, and soon we'll be ready to accept what's being offered. I find myself believing them. These letters were found in postal sorting facilities throughout Pennsylvania, but none reached their intended recipients. Every piece of mail sent from Blackheath in those final weeks was mysteriously delayed, misfiled, or lost entirely in the postal system. It was as if some invisible force was ensuring that news from the valley remained contained within its borders. The last communication from Blackheath was a telegram sent by mine supervisor Thomas Henley to company headquarters on October 19, 1865. Miners report breakthrough in deep tunnel. Unusual chamber discovered. Need geological team immediately. Phenomena defies explanation. The response came the following morning. Team dispatched. Maintain operations until arrival. But when the geological team reached Blackheath Valley on October 21st, there was no one left to meet them. The company investigators who arrived in Blackheath on the morning of October 21st, 1865, would spend the rest of their lives trying to forget what they found. Led by geological consultant Dr. Marcus Fremont and accompanied by 2 Pennsylvania state officials, the team came prepared to examine unusual mineral formations. They found instead a mystery that would haunt American industrial history. The scene was pristine in its abandonment. Breakfast dishes sat on tables with food still on them, though now cold and beginning to spoil. In the Methodist Church, hymn books lay open to page 127, "How Great Thou Art," as if the congregation had simply paused mid-verse and walked out. The schoolhouse showed evidence of a lesson in progress. Arithmetic problems covered the blackboard, and children's slates bore half-completed answers. But it was the complete absence of struggle that truly unsettled the investigators. No overturned furniture, no signs of violence, no indication that the residents had packed belongings or prepared for departure. Personal effects remained exactly where they'd been left. Jewelry in bedroom drawers, money in the general store till, family photographs smiling down from mantelpieces. Dr. Fremont documented the scene with scientific precision, but his clinical language couldn't mask his growing unease. The lack of disturbance suggests the evacuation was voluntary and coordinated. However, the speed with which it must have occurred, all evidence points to a time frame of perhaps 1 hour, makes voluntary departure seem logistically impossible. Nearly 300 individuals, including infants and elderly residents, simply ceased their daily activities simultaneously and departed the premises. State investigator William Morrison focused on the practical questions. Where had the people gone? How had they departed? What had motivated their sudden exodus? His initial report, filed with Pennsylvania authorities, revealed the first clues and the first impossibilities. Footprints are clearly visible in the soft soil around the town perimeter, Morrison wrote. They indicate a single group moving in formation toward the northwest forest. The prints show no signs of distress, no running, no irregular spacing that would indicate panic or coercion. Men, women, and children walked calmly into the wilderness, leaving a trail that could be followed. The investigators followed that trail for 3 miles through dense Pennsylvania woodland. The footprints remained clear and consistent. Approximately 285 to 290 individual sets of tracks moving in a loose formation. Children's smaller prints clustered near adult ones, suggesting families had walked together. The elderly, who should have struggled with such a trek, showed no signs of difficulty or assistance. But at exactly 3 miles from the town's edge, the impossible occurred. The trail simply ended. Not gradually, not at a riverbank or rocky outcrop that would naturally obscure tracks. The footprints continued with perfect clarity for miles, then abruptly stopped at an unremarkable patch of forest floor. The last clear print was that of a child's boot, pressed deep into soft earth. Beyond that point, nothing. Dr. Fremont examined the soil composition, searching for geological explanations. The ground showed no signs of disturbance, no evidence of vehicles that might have transported people away. The forest floor was undisturbed beyond the termination point, with normal patterns of fallen leaves and woodland debris. It appears, Dr. Fremont wrote in his final report, as if nearly 300 people simply dematerialized at this location. I can offer no scientific explanation for this phenomenon. While investigators puzzled over the impossible trail, mine foreman Jacob Winters, part of the company team, descended into the Blackheath mine system to examine the unusual chamber mentioned in Thomas Henley's final telegram. What he found beneath the earth would provide the only clue to the residents' fate, though it raised far more questions than it answered. The mine shafts, which company records showed extending to a maximum depth of 400 feet, now descended much further. The wooden supports that should have marked familiar territory gave way to smooth stone passages that seemed to have been carved with impossible precision. The tunnels formed perfect circles, their walls polished to an almost mirror-like finish. "It's like walking through the gullet of some massive creature," Winters reported via speaking tube to the surface team. "The passages spiral downward in a pattern I've never seen in 30 years of mining. And there's still light down here, though I can't determine its source." Following the spiraling path, Winters discovered what the missing telegram had referred to: a vast underground chamber that couldn't possibly exist according to geological surveys of the region. The cavern stretched beyond the reach of his lantern light, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The walls were covered in formations that resembled crystalline structures, though unlike any mineral deposits he'd encountered. But it was what occupied the chamber floor that left Winters speechless. Arranged in perfect geometric patterns across the cavern floor were personal belongings from every household in Blackheath. Family photographs, children's toys, tools, clothing, jewelry, all carefully placed in spiraling formations that seemed to follow some incomprehensible design. At the center of each spiral lay a single item: a piece of coal, polished smooth and carved with symbols that resembled no known written language. "The belongings aren't scattered or thrown," Winters reported, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "They're arranged with care, almost reverently, as if someone was creating a memorial or an offering." More unsettling was the discovery that many of these items showed signs of recent handling. Family photographs bore fresh fingerprints. Children's dolls had been recently combed and dressed. Tools showed no dust accumulation, despite the mine's typically dirty environment. Someone had been in the chamber recently. Someone had been caring for these abandoned possessions. As Winters explored deeper into the cavern, he began to notice sounds. The same humming that residents had reported, but now clearly audible and seeming to emanate from the crystalline formations themselves. The sound was musical, complex, and somehow comforting despite the eerie circumstances. "I should be frightened down here," Winters spoke into his voice recorder. "But the sound is peaceful. It makes me want to stay, to listen longer. I understand now why the residents were drawn to the mine. There's something beautiful happening in this place." It was then that Winters made his most disturbing discovery: fresh footprints in the soft earth of the cavern floor. Hundreds of them, leading from the entrance he'd used to various points throughout the chamber. The prints showed the same pattern as those found in the forest above: men, women, and children walking calmly, purposefully. But these footprints didn't lead back to the entrance. They led deeper into the cave system, following passages that stretched beyond the reach of any light Winters carried. As he stood at the threshold of these deeper tunnels, the humming grew stronger, more welcoming. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Winters found himself taking a step forward into the darkness. His final transmission to the surface team came 30 minutes later. "The sound is extraordinary down here. I can see why they chose to stay. I think I understand now. Don't send anyone else down. Some discoveries are meant to remain buried." The speaking tube fell silent. When Jacob Winters failed to return from the mineshaft after 6 hours, Dr. Fremont made the decision that would seal Blackheath's fate. Rather than mount a rescue operation, rather than investigate further, he ordered the mine sealed immediately. "The safety risks are too significant," he wrote in his official report to the Allegheny Mining Company. "The structural integrity of the deep shafts is compromised, and the risk of cave-in makes further exploration inadvisable." But workers who participated in the sealing operation later told a different story. The mine entrance wasn't simply blocked, it was obliterated. Explosives were used not just to collapse the tunnels, but to bring down entire sections of the surrounding hillside. The operation continued for 3 days, until no trace of the minehead remained visible. They were scared, recalled demolitions expert Patrick Kane in a 1923 interview. Dr. Fremont and those company men, they were terrified of what was down there. They didn't want it sealed. They wanted it erased. The Allegheny Mining Company moved with similar efficiency to eliminate all trace of Blackheath from official records. The town was removed from tax rolls, deleted from postal routes, and omitted from the 1870 census. Maps were reprinted to show the valley as uninhabited wilderness. Company employment records were lost in a convenient office fire in 1867. State investigator William Morrison's report was classified and buried in Pennsylvania archives, where it remained hidden for over a century. Dr. Fremont's geological survey was never published, and he spent the remainder of his career studying mineral deposits in California, as far from Pennsylvania coal country as possible. But perhaps most tellingly, every person involved in the Blackheath investigation was transferred, relocated, or retired within 6 months of their visit to the valley. Dr. Fremont accepted a position with the California Geological Survey. Morrison took early retirement and moved to Oregon. The Pennsylvania state officials who had accompanied the team were reassigned to administrative roles in other departments. It was a systematic erasure, as if some invisible force was ensuring that knowledge of Blackheath's fate could never spread beyond those who had witnessed it firsthand. The only person who refused to abandon the mystery was Eleanor Hartwell's sister, Rebecca, who had been expecting the school teacher's return to Philadelphia. When months passed without word, Rebecca hired a private investigator to locate her missing sibling. The investigator's report, preserved in the Hartwell family papers, provides the only independent account of the cover-up. The town called Blackheath appears never to have existed, according to official records. However, physical evidence of recent habitation is clearly visible in the valley. Foundations of buildings remain, though partially concealed by rapid plant growth. Most significantly, locals in surrounding areas confirm that families from the valley had been regular visitors to their towns for supplies and services until October 1865, when all contact abruptly ceased. Rebecca Hartwell spent 15 years pressing authorities for answers about her sister's disappearance. Her correspondence with state and federal officials reveals a pattern of evasion and misdirection that suggests coordination at the highest levels of government and industry. "They tell me the town never existed," she wrote to a friend in 1878, "but they cannot explain why its absence requires such elaborate lies." The official silence surrounding Blackheath might have been complete, but the earth itself refused to keep the secret. Over the decades that followed, the sealed valley continued to produce phenomena that local residents couldn't ignore or explain. Hunters and trappers working the forests near the former town site reported sounds that had no natural origin. The same musical humming that residents had described, now rising from the ground itself. The sound was strongest during the autumn months, particularly in October, as if marking some anniversary that the earth itself remembered. Samuel Garrett, a local fur trapper, documented these experiences in a journal that was later donated to the Pennsylvania Historical Society. "Every October for 23 years, I've heard the singing from that valley. Not wind, not animals. Singing. Human voices, harmonized like a church choir, coming from beneath the ground. This year was different. The voices were clearer, and I swear I could make out words. They were singing hymns, the old Methodist ones my grandmother used to love." More disturbing were the reports from children in surrounding communities. Starting in the 1870s, local families began experiencing the same sleepwalking incidents that had plagued Blackheath in its final weeks. Children would rise from their beds and walk purposefully toward the sealed valley, as if responding to some inaudible call. My daughter Sarah walked 6 miles through the forest in her nightgown, wrote farmer Moses Crawford in 1881. Found her standing at the edge of that valley, just listening to something I couldn't hear. When I asked her what she was doing, she said the children were calling her to come and play. These incidents occurred with such regularity that local families developed informal warning systems, sharing information about nights when the sleepwalking was most likely to occur. The pattern was always the same. Children would be drawn specifically to the sealed valley during the first weeks of October, walking directly to the spot where investigators had lost the trail of footprints 16 years earlier. Dr. Amanda Wells, the first woman licensed to practice medicine in the county, studied these cases with scientific rigor. Her research, published in the Journal of Unusual Medical Phenomena in 1889, documented similarities between the Blackheath, sleepwalking, and reported incidents across mining regions throughout Pennsylvania and West Virginia. The affected children show identical symptoms, Dr. Wells wrote. Enhanced learning capacity, improved physical health, and an overwhelming compulsion to travel towards specific geographical locations associated with deep mining operations. Most significantly, all affected children report auditory phenomena, voices or music that adults cannot perceive. Dr. Wells's research was groundbreaking in its scope, but her conclusions were too disturbing for academic acceptance. She theorized that certain mining operations had uncovered something more than coal and minerals, something that was actively communicating with sensitive individuals, particularly children. We must consider the possibility, she wrote in her final paper on the subject, that our excavations have awakened forces that have been dormant in the earth for millennia. These forces may possess intelligence, intent, and the ability to influence human behavior across vast distances. The medical establishment rejected Dr. Wells's theories as unscientific speculation. Her funding was withdrawn. Her teaching position at the University of Pennsylvania was eliminated, and she spent her final years in private practice, treating the children who continued to be affected by phenomena that official science refused to acknowledge. Despite systematic efforts to erase Blackheath from history, some people refused to forget. These witnesses, former employees of the mining company, residents of neighboring communities, family members of the vanished, preserved fragments of the truth through oral tradition and hidden documents. Martha Kowalski had worked as a laundress for several Blackheath families, walking to the town twice weekly from her home in nearby Millerville. When the town disappeared, she lost not only her livelihood, but friends she'd known for years. Her testimony, recorded by her granddaughter in 1932, provides one of the most detailed accounts of Blackheath's final weeks. Those last days, the people seemed different, calmer, like they'd found peace about something. Mrs. O'Brien, who used to worry about everything, was serene as I'd ever seen her. The children were different too, smarter, more grown up. Little Annie Price, who was maybe 8 years old, started talking about things that would make a professor scratch his head. But what I remember most was the sound. Even us folks in Millerville could hear it on quiet nights, like the earth was humming a lullaby. My own children would stand in our yard and listen, and their faces would get this dreamy look, like they were remembering something beautiful they'd forgotten. More significant were the documents preserved by Thomas Henley's widow. When company officials came to collect her husband's papers after his disappearance, Mary Henley had the foresight to hide his personal journal and several technical reports. These documents, discovered in her attic after her death in 1894, provide the only detailed record of the mining operation's final weeks. Henley's journal reveals that the changes in the mine system had been far more extensive than anyone realized. Beginning in August 1865, The coal seams had begun yielding minerals that weren't supposed to exist in Pennsylvania geology. Crystalline formations that seemed to grow rather than simply be extracted. The crystals pulse with their own light, Henley wrote on September 15th. The men are frightened to handle them, but I've noticed that exposure seems to improve their health. Burns heal faster, coughs disappear, old injuries stop aching. Whatever these formations are, they seem to be beneficial to human physiology. More disturbing was Henley's documentation of structural changes in the mine tunnels themselves. The wooden support beams were being replaced by something that grew from the rock walls. Organic-looking formations that were stronger than timber and seemed to repair themselves when damaged. It's as if the mountain is taking over the maintenance of our tunnels, Henley observed. The passages are becoming more stable, not less, but they're also becoming something that wasn't built by human hands. Henley's final entries describe his growing realization that the mining operation had uncovered not just unusual geological formations, but something that was actively reshaping the underground environment. We're not mining anymore. We're being invited in. The tunnels extend themselves overnight, leading us deeper than we ever intended to go. The crystals light our way. The walls strengthen themselves, and the air grows purer the deeper we descend. My men should be exhausted after weeks of this impossible work, but they're stronger than they've ever been. I think we've found something that's been waiting for us, something that wants to help us, to make us better than we are. The question is whether we're brave enough to accept what it's offering. As the 19th century drew to a close, careful observers began to notice that Blackheath wasn't an isolated incident. Across the coal mining regions of Appalachia, similar disappearances were occurring, always small communities, always associated with unusually productive mining operations, always followed by complete official silence. Dr. Jonathan Hale, a professor of anthropology at Harvard University, spent 2 decades researching what he termed industrial vanishings. His work, published privately in 1899 as Lost Communities of the American Coalfields, documented 17 cases of mining towns that had disappeared from official records between 1865 and 1895. The pattern is consistent across all documented cases, Dr. Hale wrote. Small communities experience unprecedented mining productivity. Residents report unusual geological phenomena. Children display enhanced cognitive abilities, and then the entire population vanishes without trace. In each case, mining companies and government officials deny the communities ever existed. Dr. Hale's research revealed that these incidents were concentrated in specific geological regions, areas where coal seams descended to unusual depths and where mining operations had penetrated deeper into the earth than was typical for the period. More significantly, chemical analysis of coal samples from these regions showed mineral compositions that differed from standard anthracite and bituminous deposits. These coal seams contain crystalline inclusions that don't match any known mineral formations, Dr. Hale noted. The crystals appear to be organic in origin, though no biological process currently understood could account for their structure and properties. Perhaps most disturbing was Dr. Hale's discovery that the missing communities had maintained contact with each other. Postal records, carefully reconstructed from surviving fragments, showed regular correspondence between the vanished towns. Letters spoke of shared experiences, common discoveries, and coordination of activities that suggested the communities were working together towards some unknown goal. It appears these settlements were not isolated victims of some geological phenomenon, Dr. Hale concluded, but willing participants in a coordinated effort whose purpose remains unknown. Dr. Hale's research was dismissed by mainstream academia and condemned by mining industry representatives. His funding was withdrawn, his position at Harvard was eliminated, and his published work was systematically removed from university libraries. By 1900, Dr. Hale had disappeared as thoroughly as the communities he'd studied, leaving behind only fragments of research preserved by a few loyal colleagues. The message was clear. Some questions were not meant to be asked, and some patterns were not meant to be recognized. In 1923, nearly 60 years after Blackheath's disappearance, a geological survey team working for the Pennsylvania Department of Natural Resources made a discovery that would have vindicated Dr. Hale's research, if anyone had been brave enough to publish it. The team, led by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, daughter of the original investigator William Morrison, was conducting routine mineral assessments when ground-penetrating radar revealed massive void spaces beneath the sealed valley. The caverns extended far deeper than any natural cave system should exist, following patterns that suggested intelligent design rather than geological formation. The underground structure resembles a vast complex of interconnected chambers, Dr. Morrison wrote in her confidential report. The architecture, if it can be called that, shows mathematical precision that exceeds any known natural cave formation. More significantly, the chambers appear to be illuminated by some internal light source that our instruments cannot identify. Against official orders, Dr. Morrison authorized a limited excavation at the edge of the valley. The team's findings, preserved in her private papers and donated to the Smithsonian Institution after her death, provide the closest thing to proof that Blackheath's residents may have found exactly what they were looking for. 20 feet below the surface, the excavation team discovered the first evidence of the vanished community. A perfectly preserved schoolroom, complete with desks, books, and teaching materials. But this wasn't the original Blackheath schoolhouse. It was something new, built with materials and techniques unknown in 1865. The walls were constructed from the same crystalline formations that Thomas Henley had described in his journal, but arranged in patterns that created both structural stability and natural illumination. The desks were carved from a single mineral that combined the hardness of granite with the workability of wood. Most remarkably, the schoolroom showed signs of recent use. Books lie open to lessons in advanced mathematics and geological sciences, Dr. Morrison recorded. The blackboard shows equations that wouldn't be developed by surface mathematics for another decade. This classroom was not only occupied after 1865, it was occupied by students whose education far exceeded anything available in that era. Deeper excavation revealed an entire underground community. Houses, shops, workshops, and laboratories built from the same crystalline materials. The architecture combined familiar 19th-century domestic layouts with structural innovations that seemed decades ahead of their time. Electric lighting powered by an unknown energy source illuminated streets that had been carefully planned and constructed. But it was the discovery in the community center that finally revealed the truth about Blackheath's residents. The building contained what could only be described as a museum. Carefully preserved artifacts from life on the surface, arranged chronologically to tell the story of human industrial development. Mining tools showed the progression from hand implements to steam-powered equipment. Photographs documented the evolution of mining communities from rough camps to established towns. At the center of the museum stood a series of displays that chilled Dr. Morrison's team to the bone. Detailed plans for mining operations that wouldn't be developed for decades. Maps of mineral deposits that surface surveys wouldn't discover until the 1940s. Technical drawings for extraction equipment that was far beyond 1920s engineering capabilities. It appears, Dr. Morrison wrote in her final report, that the residents of Blackheath didn't simply disappear, they descended. They found something underground that offered them knowledge and capabilities far exceeding anything available on the surface, and they chose to accept that offer. The most disturbing discovery was a series of journals, written in familiar handwriting, documenting life in the underground community, well into the 20th century. Eleanor Hartwell's precise script filled dozens of volumes, describing educational methods that produce students capable of advanced scientific research. Thomas Henley's engineering notes showed the development of mining techniques that wouldn't be invented on the surface for another generation. "We have been given a gift," wrote Margaret O'Brien in an entry dated 1889. "The opportunity to develop human potential without the limitations imposed by surface politics and economics. Our children learn directly from the earth itself, gaining knowledge that took surface civilization centuries to accumulate. We are no longer merely extracting resources from the ground. We are partnering with forces that understand the planet's deepest secrets." But perhaps the most chilling entry came from Dr. Cornelius Webb, writing in 1901, "The children born here have capabilities that exceed anything I observed in surface medicine. They seem to understand biological processes at the cellular level, can diagnose illnesses through observation alone, and show healing abilities that border on the miraculous. We are witnessing the next stage of human evolution, guided by intelligence that has been patient enough to wait millions of years for the right partnership." Dr. Morrison's excavation was shut down after only 3 weeks. Her team was disbanded, her funding eliminated, and her research classified under national security provisions that wouldn't be declassified until the 21st century. But her private notes reveal the most significant discovery of all: evidence that the underground community was still growing. "Fresh construction is evident throughout the complex," she wrote in her final personal entry. "New chambers are being carved, new facilities built. The community isn't just surviving underground, it's thriving. And based on the scale of recent construction, it's still accepting new members. Today, if you drive through the valleys of southwestern Pennsylvania, you might pass the area where Blackheath once stood without ever knowing it. The valley appears on modern maps as state forest land, marked for hiking and camping. The Pennsylvania Department of Natural Resources maintains the fiction that it's pristine wilderness, never touched by industrial development. But local residents know better. Every October, park rangers report unusual seismic activity in the region, regular vibrations that monitoring equipment can't explain. Hikers describe sounds that seem to rise from the ground itself, musical, harmonious, and strangely compelling. Children on school trips sometimes wander away from their groups, drawn toward specific areas of the forest where the sound seems strongest. "We've learned not to bring elementary school groups here during October," admits one retired park ranger, speaking on condition of anonymity. "The kids get distracted, like they're listening to something we can't hear. A few years ago, we almost lost a whole third-grade class when they walked off the marked trail, moving like they knew exactly where they were going. Modern technology has revealed what 19th century investigators couldn't detect. Ground-penetrating radar shows extensive void spaces beneath the valley floor, chambers that extend for miles underground, connected by passages that seem to follow mathematical patterns rather than natural geological formation. Electromagnetic surveys detect energy sources deep below the surface that don't match any known geological phenomena. But perhaps the most telling evidence comes from the children themselves. Every year, a small number of families in the region report children who display sudden advanced learning abilities, particularly in sciences related to geology, chemistry, and engineering. These children often speak of friends underground, who teach them things that aren't covered in any school curriculum. Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who has studied these cases since 2010, has documented abilities that challenge conventional understanding of human learning capacity. These children demonstrate knowledge of geological processes that graduate students struggle to understand. They can predict seismic events with remarkable accuracy, identify mineral compositions through observation alone, and show intuitive understanding of deep earth chemistry that would take decades of study to develop normally. More disturbing is Dr. Chen's discovery that affected children often express a desire to go underground, where they can learn more effectively. Several families have reported children who attempt to dig in their backyards, claiming they want to get closer to the teachers. The children aren't troubled or distressed, Dr. Chen notes. They speak of their underground contacts with affection and gratitude. They describe a place of learning and growth that sounds almost paradisiacal. The concerning part is their increasing disconnection from surface life as these abilities develop. In 2019, a team of investigative journalists from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette attempted to research the Blackheath story for a feature article on forgotten Pennsylvania history. Their investigation, led by reporter Michael Santos, uncovered more evidence in 6 months than official investigations had found in over a century. Santos's team located surviving family papers, interviewed descendants of witnesses, and used modern archaeological techniques to map the underground complex. Their research revealed that the pattern Dr. Jonathan Hale had identified in the 1890s was still continuing. Small mining communities across Appalachia have been disappearing for over 150 years, Santos documented. The coal industry's consolidation provides perfect cover. When a mining company closes operations in a remote area, no one questions why the workers don't relocate to other towns. They just vanish from the records. But Santos's investigation revealed something more disturbing, evidence that the disappearances were becoming more frequent. Census data, when carefully analyzed, showed population discrepancies in dozens of small mining towns across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Communities that should have housed several hundred residents showed signs of habitation by only a few dozen families. The population is slowly bleeding away, Santos wrote in his unpublished draft, drawn underground by something that offers knowledge, healing, and evolutionary advancement beyond anything available on the surface. The Post-Gazette never published Santos's investigation. His research was confiscated by federal authorities under provisions of the Mining Safety Act, his interviews were classified, and his employment was terminated. Santos himself disappeared while on a research trip to the Blackheath Valley in November 2019. His final email to his editor read, "I found them. They're all here, in the most beautiful place you can imagine. The sound is incredible, like the earth itself is singing. I understand now why they chose to stay. I understand why they're still inviting others to join them." The email was never delivered. Federal investigators claimed it was fabricated by environmental extremists attempting to damage the coal mining industry. Santos's family was told he'd suffered a hiking accident and that his body couldn't be recovered from the dangerous terrain. But park rangers working the area report something different. Michael Santos was seen on security cameras walking calmly into the forest, alone, carrying no camping equipment. He walked directly toward the center of the valley, moving with the same purposeful direction that investigators had noted in the footprint trail from 1865. The cameras show him stopping at exactly the spot where the original trail had ended. He stands there for several minutes, apparently listening to something. Then he smiles, nods once, and walks forward into terrain where the cameras can no longer track him. He was never seen again on the surface. As we reach the end of this investigation, we're left with questions that may never have satisfactory answers. What did the residents of Blackheath discover beneath their mining town? What force or intelligence had been waiting in the deep places of the earth for the right moment to make contact with humanity? The evidence suggests something that challenges our fundamental assumptions about life on this planet. The consistent reports of advanced learning, improved health, and technological capabilities beyond their era point to contact with intelligence far exceeding human knowledge. The mathematical precision of the underground architecture, the energy sources that power the subterranean communities, the crystalline formations that seem to grow rather than simply exist, all of this suggests contact with something that understands the planet's deepest secrets. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Blackheath mystery isn't what happened to the residents. It's what they discovered about the true nature of human potential. The reports of enhanced abilities, accelerated learning, and evolutionary advancement suggest that contact with this underground intelligence doesn't just provide knowledge. It transforms those who accept its invitation. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's final notes, discovered among her papers after her death, offer perhaps the most honest assessment of what investigators found beneath the Pennsylvania Valley. We are faced with evidence of intelligence that has been present on this planet far longer than human civilization. This intelligence appears benevolent, offering partnership rather than conquest, education rather than exploitation. The residents of Blackheath weren't victims. They were students who accepted an opportunity for advancement that we, in our surface-bound ignorance, couldn't understand. The question isn't what happened to them. The question is whether we're brave enough to consider that they made the right choice. Modern seismic monitoring equipment continues to detect the regular vibrations that rise from the sealed valley every October. The sound, that musical humming that residents described over 150 years ago, can still be heard by those who know how to listen. Children still feel its call, still walk toward the forest with that same purposeful direction that has marked the pattern for generations. And every year, a few more families report that their children have learned things that can't be explained by conventional education. A few more young people speak of friends underground who offer knowledge beyond anything available on the surface. The invitation, it seems, remains open. Tonight, as you're sitting wherever you happen to be, maybe in a city apartment, maybe in a suburban home, maybe in some small town not so different from Blackheath, ask yourself this: if someone offered you the chance to trade the limitations of surface life for unlimited learning, perfect health, and evolutionary advancement, what would you choose? The residents of Blackheath faced that choice in 1865. The evidence suggests they chose transformation over safety, unknown possibility over familiar limitation. They walked away from everything they knew towards something that promised to make them more than human. And they seem to have found exactly what they were looking for. The coal industry, the government officials, the academic institutions, they all worked together to bury this story because it represents the most dangerous idea possible: that the life we're living on the surface isn't the best humanity can achieve. That there are other options, other paths, other forms of existence that offer capabilities we can barely imagine. They want us to believe that Blackheath never existed, because if it did exist, if those people really did find something better underground, then everything we accept about modern life becomes a choice rather than an inevitability. And choice is the most dangerous thing you can give to people who have learned to accept limitation as natural law. But the vibrations still rise from the sealed valley every October. The children still hear the calling. The invitation still echoes through the deep places of the earth, waiting for those brave enough to consider that the footprints that led into the forest and simply ended might have led somewhere wonderful after all. So tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And if you heard that same musical humming rising from the ground beneath your feet, if you felt that same gentle invitation to discover what lies beneath the surface of everything you've been told is possible, what would you choose? The Earth is patient. It's been waiting millions of years for the right partnership. And something tells me it's still waiting, still offering, still singing that beautiful song that only the children seem to hear clearly. Maybe it's time we learned to listen. The choice, as it was for the residents of Blackheath, remains entirely ours to make. But remember, some choices can only be made once. And some paths, once taken, lead to places where the old maps of human possibility no longer apply. Sweet dreams.